So we're carrying forward the themes of enchantment and some of your own interests, which arose in our seminar discussion on Wednesday. And this lecture is going to consider the nature of nature in Middle-earth. We've been thinking about the nature of nature with the writings of Erigena, Mallory, even Julian of Norwich, and a few others. So we're going to continue that. We're also going to be talking about its spiritual laws. I'll closely read one of the Elvish poems to understand the form and tradition of Tolkien's poetry, and where I think he's drawing most of his inspiration. And I'll conclude with some thoughts on Eucatastrophe, the final or the ending of the Fellowship of the Ring. In my last lecture, I spoke of the moral laws that held together the fabric of this universe, sort of the unity of Middle-earth. So to begin, I'm going to carry that just a little bit further. What never fails to surprise me about this book is the acceptance of the will of others, almost to the extent of foolishness. The Fellowship of the Ring's characters are often too liberal in their kindness. When Frodo tells Gandalf that Bilbo should have killed Gollum when he had the chance, he's saying what we are all feeling. How efficient it would be to have prevented the entire ordeal that brought the ring to Bag End and endangered the Shire. But Gandalf replies, famously, in a passage that made it into the movie, pity? When, when Frodo says it was a pity that Bilbo didn't kill him. Pity, says Gandalf, it was pity that stayed his hand, pity and mercy, not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from evil and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity. Now consider for a moment the demands of this beautiful statement placed upon Frodo. The best and more peaceable portion of Eriador, the Shire, is compromised. The prosperity of the hobbits in all of their innocent joys, all of Frodo's closest friends, his dearest places, are threatened by the most unimaginable evil, by the creature to whom Gandalf believes we should be giving pity. That even for the most seemingly inhuman of creatures, who, if anyone in The Lord of the Rings is most liable to be dehumanized and demonized, that is Gollum, Gandalf holds pity for, is a feature of this story that is perhaps the most radical. Consider what is revealed at the Council of Elrond regarding Gollum. He was captured, he was placed in safekeeping of the elves of Mirkwood. I think Peter Jackson is making another movie about this. He was placed under the direction of, or in the safekeeping of King Thranduil. But Gollum escapes. Legolas tells us, by too much kindness. Escaped, cried Aragorn. That is ill news indeed. We shall all rue it bitterly, I fear. How came the folk of Thranduil to fail in their trust? Not through lack of watchfulness, said Legolas, but perhaps through over-kindliness. And we fear that the prisoner had aid from others, and that more is known of our doings than we could wish. We guarded this creature day and night at Gandalf's bidding, much though we wearied of the task. But Gandalf bade us hope still for his cure, and we had not the heart to keep him ever in the dungeons of the earth, where he would fall back into his old black thoughts. And so it was through showing him so much kindness. They let him out, they let him climb the tree, they watched over him. And Gandalf says, well, he is gone. We have no time to seek for him again. He must do what he will, but he may play a part yet that neither he nor Sauron have foreseen. Those of you who know that Gandalf's words are true, and that Gollum will play a large part in the great Eucatastrophe of the books, are liable to forgive such a statement. But for those of us reading this for the first time, and feeling the full weight of the darkness growing in the east, and we're anxious over the precarity of the fate of the free world, Gandalf's statement seems frustratingly optimistic, even potentially careless. And what is to account for his good faith? And it's this conviction in what in a religious sense we might call providence, that the freedom of Gollum may actually work to the good of the free peoples of Middle-earth. And I call it faith, although it can just as easily be called foolishness. I don't really have a another word for it besides those two. But this is the quality that many of the older characters of this legendarium possess, and it's what those with the shortest lives lack. So, in case you don't know, Gandalf and the elves live very long lives. If not killed, they go on living forever. In the histories of Middle-earth, we learned that in the ancient days, Gandalf was a Maya named Olorin, and this was in Valinor, the blessed realm of the Undying Lands, which gets an occasional mention in this novel. But Gandalf, or Olorin, was one of the wisest of the Maiar. So Gandalf lived ages in Valinor. He studied under Nienna, who was one of the Valar. And the Valar are basically gods or these angelic figures with great powers. And Nienna, by the way, was the patron of mercy. This is the Valar whom Gandalf studied under. So you begin to see a little bit from Gandalf's ancient history how his wisdom is playing a role here. There's also this fact, and Elrond has his own interesting history. He is a foster son, and it's interesting that he will also adopt a foster son, Aragorn, in later years and kind of repeat that pattern. But to call back to some of the histories which we're not reading, how did Gandalf get to Middle-earth? So the Valar decided to send Ishtari, or Istari, or wizards into Middle-earth, and these were sent to oppose Sauron, who had set up camp in Middle-earth. And the Lord of the Valar, Manwë, wanted to send Olorin, but Olorin did not want to go. Apart from the fact that Olorin feared Gandalf, he also thought that he was too weak to fight. I'm sorry. Uh, Despite the fact that Olorin feared Sauron and believed himself too weak to fight against him, he was sent anyway. And actually, Olorin was begging Manwë not to not to let him go, not to send him away. But Manwë thought that because Olorin did not believe in his own powers and had a sense of his own weakness, that it all the more qualified him to leave Middle-earth, or leave to go into Middle-earth from the Blessed Realm. So this is part of Gandalf's history, and if we see in Frodo the theme of the reluctant hero, or even the reluctant priest, in Gandalf's history we see him as the reluctant prophet, just as Aragorn, we will see if you keep on reading, is someone of a reluctant king. Now, none of these heroes seek the power or the greatness for themselves, but rather seek the communal good. And so Olorin crossed the sea and became Gandalf, and as a sign of his humility, he took on the form of an old man, and he's basically a Maya in service to the creator god, the Eru Ilúvatar. All of this is kind of informing what's so bizarre about the ethics of Middle-earth. And Gandalf has an interesting self-disclosing statement on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, which you read, in which he addresses the Balrog. He says, "You cannot pass," he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, a wielder of the flame of Arnor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." So as a servant of the secret fire, that's Gandalf as a Maya, it could be said that Gandalf is referring to the ring of fire, which he actually does wear. Oh yes, Gandalf has a ring of power. It's not as powerful as Sauron's, and he keeps it a secret. And it's interesting when Frodo begins to bear the Great Ring, it's then when he first notices Gandalf's Narya. So it could be that, but it's also likely a reference to the creative fire, the flame of Arnor. It's the creative power of the Ilúvatar. Perhaps Anor is the Elvish word for sun, which represents the light of day associated with the ancient trees of light that illuminated the world in the ancient days. But clearly, the symbology is working here on multiple levels. Contrasted is the secret holy fire that Gandalf wields against the dark fire of the Balrog, the flame of Udun. Udun, if you look on the map, you'll see it's a little valley, circular valley near the gates of Mordor. But really, Udun here is referring to the great fortress of the north where Morgoth used to reign. So you've got two words for two different things going on here. So all of this is really important just to add weight to Gandalf's judgment. It's clearly a higher and more ancient wisdom that is at work in Gandalf's wisdom. But it's still shocking the reluctance to which older characters give advice or tell others what to do. This came up in our discussion on Wednesday. We were considering Gildor in the chapter titled Three's Company. Frodo has to beg him for counsel, which the elf finally does reluctantly. And I began to wonder, surely there's something Tolkien said in his own personal thought that might explain this remarkable feature of his work. And there's this well known among Tolkien scholars passage from his letters. This is Tolkien writing to his son Christopher. My political opinions lean more and more to anarchy, philosophically understood, meaning abolition of control, not whiskered men with bombs, or to unconstitutional monarchy, which, by the way, seems a bit of a paradox. And the most improper job of any man, even saints, who at any rate were at least unwilling to take it on, is bossing other men. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity. And at least it is done only to a small group of men who know who their master is. The medievals were only too right in taking nolo episcopari as the best reason a man could give to others for making him a bishop. Give me a king whose chief interest in life is stamps, railways, or race cars, or race horses, and who has the power to sack his visor, or whatever you care to call him if he does not like the cut of his trousers, and so on down the line. It's a really strange letter, and I've cut bits from it in giving you this, but I think there are two things I want to focus on here. The first is the inadequacy of anyone to direct the fate of anyone else. And this is, I think, part of the underlying ethical principle that shapes the moral architecture of Middle-earth. We think of Tom Bombadil's mastery of the woods being very different from the dominion of Sauron and others like him. This partly explains why Gandalf came to Middle-earth in the form of an old man, someone who gives counsel but does not compel others to follow it. And this principle informs Gildor's reluctance to give advice. When Frodo asks him whether he should wait for Gandalf, this is what Gildor says. Gildor was silent for a moment. I do not like this news. That Gandalf should be late does not bode well, but it is said, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. The choice is yours, to go or wait. And it is also said, answered Frodo, go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both no and yes. Is it indeed? Laughed Gildor. Elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift. Even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill. This passage reveals a sense of precarity that even the counsel of the wisest may not be safe. It also reinforces the idea that those who seem to be ones who should be in charge are least likely to take charge. And once you notice this aspect of the story, you'll see it everywhere. And the second point I'd like to make is, just by way of elucidation, nolo episcopari translates, I do not want to be made bishop. So when Tolkien writes that the medievals were only too right in taking nolo episcopari as the best reason a man could give to others for making him a bishop, he argues that reluctance to take on power or a role of authority is the true mark of someone who should be in that position. And we see this qualifying reluctance in the councils of Gildor, in the histories of Frodo, Gandalf, and Aragorn, and at play in the Council of Elrond. So having, I think, really tied up that consideration that I pursued last week, I want us to talk about the fabric of nature. What nature is in Middle-earth. So the histories of Middle-earth that we've not read provide a more cosmological and theological vision for the nature rooted in the mythology in this book. If you go back to the Silmarillion, you'll find, for example, the divine figure of Yavanna, the queen of the earth and the giver of fruits. Her concern are the trees as moral subjects. These are the prophetic origins of the Ints, which appear in the second book. And really, it's this notion that all creation, including plants, exists within this spiritual and metaphysical fabric of nature, this network. So when Frodo awakens in Rivendell after he's healed, partially healed, by being stabbed by the Morgul blade, Gandalf mentions a concept of the Otherworld. Frodo asks whether the elves are safe against the Dark Lord, and Gandalf replies they do not fear ring wraiths, for those who have dwelt in the Blessed Realm live at once in both worlds, and against both the seen and the unseen they have great power. So then you learn that the elves are actually existing on at least two planes of reality, the seen and the unseen. The ring wraiths are existing there too, but they're enslaved in this unseen realm in a way that the elves are kind of on this higher, more liberated, unseen realm. But this is tying into the whole tradition of the otherworld, which goes back to the Celtic otherworlds and the Greek otherworlds. The blessed realm that's that comes up in this story was the western paradise beyond the sea. It contains the elven home where the elves are returning to. It's called the Undying Lands. And this concept of the western paradise has roots in mythologies of ancient Greece and of the Celts. You can find it in one of Euripides' plays, Hippolytus, in which there is a description of this legendary place in the north beyond the north wind. And it was a paradisal place of youth in which some divine beings could go back to, or semi-divine beings like Hercules would be able to go back. So you look back on some of the things we've read, Margaret Cavendish's The Blazing World, it's playing into this idea. George MacDonald's At the Back of North Wind, that's another novel that derives from this concept. But it's also there in this very early Irish mythological landscape. Early Irish mythology speaks of other worlds, some that are underground, others that are beyond the sea. So you can even see how Origina's concept of the fourfold nature informs the metaphysics of Middle-earth. Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur ends, as we read, with King Arthur being stolen away by sea to the Isle of Apples, Avalon, the mention of which first appears in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae around 1136. And this is the island where King Arthur's sword Excalibur was forged and where Arthur is taken to recover or to die, depending on how you read that. And it's often described as this magical or enchanted island, sometimes seen as a paradise. And I think that this Celtic otherworld is informing the Blessed Realm in the West in Tolkien's Legendarium. The wound that Frodo suffered at Weathertop is actually something he never fully recovers from. The elves bring him back just in time from the brink of becoming a wraith himself. But at the end of the books, Frodo, like King Arthur, is ferried away to the undying lands of the West to heal from the wound. Frodo doesn't become immortal, he will die in the Blessed Realm. But there's something still unhealed from being stabbed by the Ringwraith that he needs to heal from. So you've even got that intertextual possibility there. So you have a sense of how this whole concept of the otherworld in literature to really appreciate Tolkien's Otherworlds. For it is not only the Blessed Realm, but also the places of these otherworlds, such as the tombs beneath the Barrow Downs, as well as the seen and unseen worlds that comprise layered realities in which the elves enjoy equally. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the question of religion and gods in Middle-earth. It's very clear we're reading some letters, or discussing some letters in our seminar, that Tolkien was insistent that there is no religion in Middle-earth and there's no allegory in a strict one-to-one relationship to any kind of contemporary or earthly religion. But there is a spiritual hierarchy in which everything exists and is ordered, and there is spirituality. We might even say a devotional sensibility present in Middle Earth, which suggests that the lesser gods are still operative in the affairs of Middle Earth. And for this consideration, we'll closely read one of the Elven songs regarding Elbereth, which is the Sindarin name for Varda, one of the Valar who lives in the West. She is the most beloved Valar of the elves in Middle-earth. And now this is the hymn which Frodo heard before the approach of Gildor. And Gildor's company was singing in the woods this song. Snow White, O Lady clear, O Queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here amid the world of woven trees. This, I'm going to talk about this formally and then within the whole tradition of what I think Tolkien's poetry is in. This is a hymn of praise, and addressed to the Queen beyond the western seas. The repetition of her epithet, Snow White here, and in the second stanza, is in part within this whole tradition of the invocation of many hymns within the medieval Christian tradition, especially the Marian hymns, which lived on in the Roman Catholic Rite and the Victorian, and of course it lives on now. But for Tolkien, it lived on in the literary fabric of some of the Victorian medievalists, which preceded Tolkien's work. So if you take, for example, one of these Latin hymns, Ave Maris Stella, you'll see some thematic and structural similarities. Ave Maris Stella, de mater alma, atque semper virgo, felix caele porta. Hail, star of the sea, mother of God, and ever virgin, happy gates of heaven. Sumens illud ave, Gabrielis ore, funda nos in pace, mutans ive nomen. Receiving that hail from the mouth of Gabriel, found us in peace, or establish us in peace, change the name of Eve. So this transformative process. But notice the repetition of the epithet. There's Maris Stella, there's De Mater Alma, Star of the Sea, Mother of God. It goes on, it's longer. There's also Virgo Singularis, the singular virgin. So you can feel how this poem, the elves' devotion to Elbereth, is very compatible with some of the lyric traditions that Tolkien is a part of, especially from Roman Catholic devotion. So beyond the western seas, right here, there's this sense of furtherness. This is a reference to the blessed realm. She remains a light to those that wander here amid the world of woven trees. So this suggests that she still is operative in the world. She has a presence and an activity still present in Middle-earth. She was the one who scattered the stars, by the way. So the stars are very important to the elves. It comes up a lot, as we see not only with these elves, but also those in Lothlorien. We can locate this poem formally as a hymn or an ode, such as Sappho's beautiful hymn to Aphrodite. But to what other literary traditions does Tolkien's poetry belong to? Gilthoniel, O Elbereth, clear are thy eyes, and bright thy breath. Snow White, we sing to thee in a far land beyond the sea. Here you have a very clear theme of exile, which is prevalent in the Jewish Psalms and is a key devotional sensibility for the diasporic elves They are also away from their land, by choice, mostly. And this theme carries over in the Christian tradition with hymns. In the English Roman Catholic tradition, we can locate this theme uh, very comfortably in Cardinal John Henry Newman's hymn, Lead Kindly Light, which we read for the Bible course not that long ago. Also, in employing this theme of exile, of diaspora, we are in the wilderness, away from home. And this is the Victorian cardinal, English cardinal John Henry Newman. Lead kindly light amidst the encircling gloom. Lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. But Tolkien takes more from the Victorian medievalist tradition than of the strictly kind of Oxford movement, Roman Catholic flavor. Uh, he also takes from the pre-Raphaelites, and some of you are picking this up. I can tell from the conversation we had Wednesday. And I don't think enough has been said about the debt of Tolkien's poetry to William Morris and the other pre-Raphaelites. Consider the opening lines of this poem by Christina Rossetti, is like pre-Raphaelite adjacent. We've read her work before. In the blessed damsel leaned out from the golden bar of heaven. Her eyes were deeper than the depth of water still did even. She had 3 lilies in her hand, and the stars in her hair were 7. Her robe, ungirt from clasp to hem, no wrought flowers did adorn, but a white rose of Mary's gift for service meetly worn. Her hair that lay along her back was yellow like ripe corn. So in Tolkien's poem, this is just some adjacent comparisons here. The elves who sing this hymn espouse the idea that the stars are beings that influence the world with this secret grace. Notice the turn from Elbereth here to the apostrophe to the stars themselves. O stars that in the sunless year with shining hand by her were sown, in windy fields, now bright and clear, we see your silver blossom blown. There's some beautiful lines here. World of woven trees, silver blossom blown. He really ends the stanzas beautifully. And isn't this similar? I think, was it Judith? You mentioned this, that it's very similar to Gerard Manley Hopkins' The Starlight Night, another Roman Catholic English Victorian. This is the beginning of Gerard Manley Hopkins' The Starlight Night. Look at the stars. Look up at the skies. Oh, look at all the fire folk sitting in the air. The bright burrows, the circle citadels there. Down in dim woods, the diamond delves, the elves' eyes. By the grey lawns cold, where quick gold lies. So the sentience and providence of the stars is, for many Roman Catholics, a symbol of the communion of saints. It's at least suggestive of the communion of saints. And for the elves, it's something very similar, we can tell. O Elbereth, Gilthoniel, we still remember, we who dwell in this far land beneath the trees, thy starlight on the western seas. Elbereth also comes up a few times in the Fellowship of the Ring, an important figure. You may have missed it, but when Gildor departs, he tells Frodo, may Elbereth protect you. And when Frodo is stabbed at Weathertop, he calls upon the name of Gilbereth Gilthoniel, which saves him. At that moment, Frodo threw himself forward on the ground, and he heard himself crying aloud, O Elbereth Gilthoniel. At the same time, he struck at the feet of his enemy. A shrill cry rang out in the night, and he felt a pain like a dart of poisoned ice pierce his left shoulder. And Strider actually says later, more deadly to him, the ringwraith, was the name of Elbereth. So stars are important in Middle-earth. In Lothlorien, Galadriel gives Frodo the phial containing the light of Arendil, the most beloved star. The name Arundel actually comes from an Anglo-Saxon or Old English poem found in the Exeter manuscript. It's the first Christ poem. And here's the passage here. Rita asked if I could read this and incorporate it into the lecture, and it fits really beautifully with this whole theme of the song. So here's part of the music that Tolkien would have heard in the original Anglo-Saxon. Eala Earendel, Engla behortast, offer mitten geard monum sendit. On stolfasta sunnen leoma, torth offer tunglas, thu tide jewanna av sulfum the, Simla and Litis. And it's Hail Arendelle, brightest of angels, over Middle Earth, which was just another name for Earth in the Anglo-Saxons. This is where Tolkien gets the name of his land. To men sent, and true light of the sun, or flame of the sun, really. True sun's flame, great above stars, you ever shine of yourself in every season. So although, and for the Anglo-Saxon, it was representing the morning star or this rising star, but Arendelle also has roots in the Old Norse figure of Arvandil, but the presence of stars are very key to this story, as it was in these Anglo-Saxon roots. Now I want to talk about the final chapter. Now, I mentioned last week that the great catastrophe that threatens this book is Frodo's isolation. Have you noticed that when the ring is worn, the figures are isolated or desiring to be isolated? The book tells us of how Bilbo used it to this purpose. When one of his neighbors was approaching, when Bilbo was out on a walk, he would slip it on his finger to hide and disappear. This is humorous, might even be harmless, but this is how it begins. The temptation of the ring is to estrange one from community, to obfuscate the encounters that are characteristic of a socially porous ecology such as the Shire. In reading Lord of the Rings this time around, it really struck me how the Ring of Power is a form of technology. In a way, it's kind of like the internet or AI. I'm not an alarmist when it comes to AI, but I think, have a healthy skepticism about its use, especially for generative writing. It really marks, I think, the advent of a new relationship to knowledge. Instead of having knowledge arrive through the outlets of communal relationships or institutions, we actually now can bypass that. We don't have to encounter our experience. And so the technology that's offered us is a shortcut from encounter, a shortcut from experience, and not to mushrooms. It's the relational knowledge which will be homogenized under a centralized source of information, which allows us to further bypass the communal nature of learning that had existed for ages. The experience gained in learning. We were talking before the meeting began of research and old research methods and how things are much more efficient now with the search engine. But there's also just like the experience of work, of writing, that now can be bypassed. The experience gained from long hours of labor in which students sustained in writing a paper, in ordering one's thoughts, in recasting a sentence until it was just right, in organizing a paragraph, and variegating the sentence style and length until the writing flowed into a coherent whole, can now be bypassed by an LLM. A lot of my students are doing this. I mean, it's like Esau selling his birthright for a bowl of pottage. It's all in the name of efficiency. And what's less efficient than doing things the hard way? And what's less convenient than being part of a community where you have a certain social obligation upon you? And you see that you can tell from over the years that Bilbo returned from the East and the time that elapsed between The Hobbit and the Fellowship of the Ring, that he really was withdrawn, and he was withdrawing. And the ring, as a certain type of technology, offers a way out of that system of obligation, that network of existence. And that's what happened to the ring wraiths. What are they but these floating entities that are not detached to the network of life, but are slaves to a hierarchy of evil. Now, before I just made an analogy to technology, the ring and technology, and before the Tolkien fans come at me, notice that I'm not making the ring into a metaphor of anything. I'm not turning the story into an allegory. I'm making note of one of the many analogies. I'm drawing an application from the story to our own time. An application is different from interpretation. But at the end of the book, when Frodo makes his escape from the Battle of Ammon Hill and decides to embark on his way to Mordor alone, he's doing exactly what the ring wants. The only antidote to the ring's power is friendship, community. And you can see what technology is offering us actually now. And it's interesting if you watch the movie The Fellowship of the Ring, you've no doubt seen that beautiful depiction of Samwise Gamgee chasing Frodo in the boat. But in the books, you will have noticed that when Frodo is making his escape, he actually is wearing the ring. He has the ring on when he's escaping from the others. And what Samwise sees when he comes to the shores of Bruinen is an empty boat seemingly paddling itself to Mordor. And had Samwise not endangered his life and nearly drowned, it's very likely that Frodo would have rowed away without him. He just argued from the boat. Well, what makes Frodo turn around and eventually take off the ring is saving Sam's life. And in the end of the book, he actually reaches down into the water, pulls him up by the hair. And you have this moment, "Save me, Mr. Frodo," gasped Sam. "I'm drowned. I can't see your hand." "Here it is. Don't pinch, lad. I won't let you go. Tread water and don't flounder, or you'll upset the boat. There now. Get hold of the side and let me use the paddle." With a few strokes, Frodo brought the boat back to the bank, and Sam was able to scramble out, wet as a water rat. Frodo took off the ring and stepped ashore again. "Of all the confounded nuisances, you are the worst, Sam," he says. It's really harsh. I think it's kind of funny in a way, but don't miss how annoyed Frodo is here. And he's only just now taken off the ring. And he says, "It would be the death of you to come with me, Sam," said Frodo, "and I could not have borne that." This is Frodo's excuse. And it's a good one. But notice that it's kindness masking a logic that we see eschewed all throughout the moral encounters of this work. Frodo is making a choice for Sam, and in doing so, exercising power over Sam's will. We may think of this as a kindness, but it's really a form of tyranny, a subtle form of tyranny that even Elrond and Gandalf would not exercise over Merry and Pippin, who were determined to go along. It's astounding that those old characters would let these young toddler-sized hobbits make up their mind about something they hardly know anything about. And it's this subtle influence on the ring, or of the ring, upon Frodo, depicted here, that is unwise according to the ethics of Middle-earth. But Sam is determined, and Frodo's still complaining. "So all my plan is spoilt," said Frodo. "It is no good trying to escape you. But I'm glad, Sam. I cannot tell you how glad. Come along. It is plain that we were meant to go together. We will go, and may the others find a safe road. Strider will look after them. I suppose we shall see them again. I don't suppose we shall see them again." "Yet we may, Mr. Frodo, we may," said Sam. And it's like once the evil enchantment of the ring is taken off, slowly Frodo comes back into community. The spell, the evil enchantment, is broken by Sam's determination and friendship. And in the passage in the book, it says a gladness touches Frodo's heart. So we end this book with the small Eucatastrophe that will prove to be the saving grace to the real Eucatastrophe at the end of the story, I should say, the final Eucatastrophe. So we've covered much ground. We're going to chat a little bit in Q&A. For everyone on YouTube, thanks for watching, and until next time.